Everyone has a favorite horror story. A body under a motel bed, a killer hiding in the house, a clown who entertained children by day and buried them at night. You were told to file every single one of them under fiction. You were wrong about all of them. Today we are covering 31 urban legends that were never legends at all. Every single one is documented, verified, and real, and all of them started as stories nobody believed. 1. In the 1890s, some coffins were built with a bell attached to a string inside. The idea was terrifyingly simple. If you woke up after being buried, you could pull the string and ring for help. Most people laughed at the idea. They thought it was just fear, superstition, something only the paranoid worried about. Octavia Hatcher's family did not buy one. Pikeville, Kentucky, 1891. Octavia fell gravely ill following a failed pregnancy, slipped into a deep coma, and was declared dead. The summer heat meant a quick burial. There was no time to wait. She was in the ground within days. Weeks later, more people in town began falling into the same death-like state. Doctors realized something was wrong, and someone asked the question that nobody wanted to answer. What if Octavia hadn't actually been dead? They went back to the grave. Before the coffin was even fully lifted, the lid had already told the story. Deep scratch marks were carved into the wood from the inside. Her fingernails had been torn away, shredded against a lid she could not force open. She had woken up underground, alone, in total darkness, and no one heard a thing. The bells were never superstition. They existed because this had already happened before. So when people called that fear irrational, how many were already buried with the proof? 2. On August 20th in 1966, a boy flying a kite on a hill in Niterói, Brazil, looked down and saw two men lying dead in the grass. They were dressed in suits. Over their eyes were homemade lead masks, shaped to block out all light. Beside them lay an empty water bottle and a small notebook. Inside the notebook was one short message. Be at the agreed place. Swallow capsules after effect. Protect metals. Wait for mask signal. The two men were later identified as experienced electronics technicians. They had no history of mental illness, no proven link to any cult, and no clear reason to be on that hill. By the time autopsies were done, decomposition had already made the toxicology results useless. No one could prove what they had swallowed or whether that was what killed them. One witness reported seeing a strange object in the sky that night, something that looked like a UFO. Investigators chased every lead they had. They never found who gave the instructions. They never found the capsules. They never found the metals the note mentioned. And they never learned what signal the men were waiting for. Two men climbed a hill in suits and lead masks, following directions from someone. And whatever they were waiting to see, they took the answer with them. 3. In 1985, a British couple lost their home in a fire. When investigators searched the ruins, they found one thing still sitting in the ashes, untouched: a cheap painting of a crying boy. It was not burned, not melted, not even marked by the fire that had destroyed everything else around it. When the Sun published the story, letters started arriving from all over Britain. Different homes, different fires, different years, but always the same detail. The painting survived. Fire investigators confirmed the pattern was real. The painting was a reproduction, printed in the millions across Europe during the 1950s and 60s, hanging in an enormous number of ordinary homes. The artist was a Spanish painter named Bruno Amadio, who had allegedly taken in a young orphan boy whose parents had both died in fires. The boy was said to carry misfortune wherever he went. After the child died in a car fire, Amadio painted his portrait. The painting began appearing in homes. The fires began shortly after. Scientists eventually gave a practical explanation. The print had likely been coated with a fire-resistant varnish. That explains why it survived. It does not explain why it kept surviving alone. The Sun urged readers to destroy their copies. Thousands did. Some reported their fires started the night they tried. 4. For decades, a carnival funhouse in California displayed a hanging dummy so realistic that people could not stop staring at it. Visitors touched it, posed beside it, and walked away convinced it was just an unusually well-made prop. Everyone said the same thing. It was the most realistic dummy they had ever seen. Then in December 1976, a film crew came to New Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach to shoot the $6 million man. While clearing space, one crew member grabbed the figure and its arm snapped off. Inside was human bone. It was not a prop. It was the real body of Elmer McCurdy, a small-time train robber killed in Oklahoma in 1911. No one claimed his body, so it was embalmed, displayed for money, sold from one carnival owner to another, painted over, moved around, and forgotten for 65 years. He was finally buried in 1977. No one ever figured out how many amusement parks he passed through before somebody realized the dummy had been a dead man the whole time. 5. Ghost stories are not supposed to leave evidence. That is what makes them ghost stories. Nothing to measure, nothing to prove, nothing that lasts after sunrise. But Resurrection Mary is different. Since the 1930s, drivers on Archer Avenue in Chicago have reported the same thing again and again. A young blonde woman in a white dress standing alone by the road. She gets into the car. She is quiet, calm, completely normal. Then, as the car passes Resurrection Cemetery, she disappears. No door opening, no footsteps, no movement, just gone. What makes the story harder to ignore is that the reports never seem to change. Different drivers, different years, same road, same woman, same cemetery. But in 1976, something happened that no ghost story is supposed to allow. Cemetery workers discovered the iron entrance gates had been bent violently outward from the inside. Pressed into the metal bars were what appeared to be human handprints, burned directly into the iron. Authorities had the damage, filled with concrete before any formal investigation could take place. The photographs taken before the repair still exist. The grave the legend points to is real. The name on it belongs to a young woman who died on that road. 6. Lena de Hoyos was 22 when she died of tuberculosis in Key West, Florida, in 1931. During her treatment, Dr. Carl Tanzler became obsessed with her. He visited constantly, paid for her care, and convinced himself they were meant to be together. Most people bury their grief. Tanzler buried Elena, then refused to let her stay buried. He paid for her mausoleum, then visited her body night after night. 2 years later, he removed her from the tomb and carried her home under cover of darkness, and he kept her there for 7 years. As her body decayed, he rebuilt it piece by piece. He held the bones together with wire and plaster, replaced her eyes with glass, used chemicals, fabric, and perfume to preserve what he could. He dressed her in wedding clothes he had sewn himself, and he slept beside her every night. Neighbors noticed the smell coming from the house. Nobody investigated, not for 7 years. In 1940, Elena's sister finally discovered the truth. Tanzler was arrested, but the statute of limitations had already expired. He was released without conviction. He died years later. The scariest part is not that he stole her from the grave. It is that he had 7 years to do this, and no one stopped him. 7. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people disappeared from the same small patch of Vermont wilderness near Glastonbury Mountain. Not in one incident, separately, across 5 years, with no connection to each other except the location. What made investigators uncomfortable wasn't just the disappearances, it was what the search parties found afterward. Footprints leading into the woods that simply stopped in the middle of open ground. No change of direction, no signs of struggle, no indication of what happened next. The tracks ended, and the person attached to them was gone, as if the forest had quietly closed around them. The victims were not reckless strangers, a hunter who knew the woods, a college student on a supervised hike, an 18-year-old, a 74-year-old woman, an 8-year-old girl who vanished from the side of the road during a brief school bus stop. Search teams went in every time. They found nothing. Years later, geologists found a magnetic anomaly beneath that region strong enough to interfere with compasses. Maybe it explains something. Maybe it explains nothing. But that forest is still there. And the worst part is that the disappearances did not end with an answer. They just stopped. As if whatever was taking people there no longer needed to. 8. Nobody is born afraid of clowns. That fear had to come from somewhere. Part of it came from John Wayne Gacy. In 1970s Chicago, Gacy looked like the kind of man people trusted. He was a construction contractor, active in the community, friendly with neighbors, and known for entertaining children at parties and hospital visits as Pogo the Clown. People thought he was harmless. His neighbors described him as one of the nicest men on the street. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy sexually assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men. He buried 26 of them beneath the crawlspace of his own house, the same house where neighbors gathered, where people sat laughing, eating, and telling each other how lucky they were to live next to someone like him. Police only began closing in when a 15-year-old boy disappeared after heading to Gacy's house. Investigators followed the smell coming from the crawlspace. Then they started digging and kept finding bodies. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and executed in 1994. His final words were, "Kiss my ass." The fear of clowns was never really about the paint. It was about realizing how easily a human face can become a costume too. 9. Some urban legends sound too ridiculous to be real. A man in a white rabbit costume, carrying an axe, sounds like one of them. But in October 1970, Air Force cadet Bob Bennett and his fiancée were parked near the Colchester Overpass in Virginia when a figure in a white rabbit outfit emerged from the dark and came toward their car. He shouted that they were trespassing. Then he hurled an axe through the passenger window. Bennett's fiancée disputed only one detail. She didn't think it was a rabbit suit. She said the ears looked more like long pointed headwear. 10 days later, it happened again. A security guard found a man in a rabbit costume on the porch of an unfinished house, chopping at the wood with an axe. When he got closer, the figure turned and warned him that he would lose his head if he came any nearer. Over the next few weeks, dozens of witnesses reported seeing the same figure in the same costume, with the same weapon. No one was ever identified. No one was ever arrested. And the bridge is still known as Bunny Man Bridge. So the unsettling part is not that the legend survived, it is that someone started it, and nobody ever found out who. 10. Every small town has someone people speak about carefully. The person who seems to know things they should not. In Frenier, Louisiana, in the early 1900s, that person was Julia Brown. She was a local healer. People went to her for remedies, for sickness, for problems they could not fix anywhere else. They depended on her, but they feared her too. And in her later years, she kept saying the same thing in front of witnesses. "When I die, I'm taking the whole town with me." Most people treated it like the strange talk of an old woman, something eerie but easy to ignore. Then on September 29, 1915, Julia Brown died. Her funeral was held that same afternoon. The weather had been calm all morning. By the time the service ended, the wind had changed. That evening, a hurricane tore through Frenier and wiped the town away. Buildings were destroyed, streets vanished. Almost everyone who had not escaped in time was killed. Frenier was never rebuilt, and Julia Brown's grave is still there, covered in thick concrete, wrapped in heavy chains. No one has ever given a clear reason why those chains are still there. So the unsettling part is not what she said. It is that more than 100 years later, no one has felt safe enough to take them off. 11. For years, the idea of a hidden family living underground felt like pure horror fiction. It was considered too extreme, too logistically impossible, too fundamentally human to be real. Then in 2008, it became real. Jose Fritzla was a retired engineer living in Amstetten, Austria. He was known to his neighbors as an unremarkable man. His wife Elizabeth lived with him in a normal house on a normal street. For 24 years, she believed their daughter had run away and joined a cult. Their daughter had not run away. In 1984, Fritzla locked her inside a secret apartment he had built beneath the house. Hidden behind reinforced walls and a concealed entrance, it was designed to keep someone alive for years without ever being seen. Elizabeth remained trapped there for 24 years. During that time, she gave birth to 7 children underground. 3 of them had never seen daylight. All of it was happening beneath the same house, where his wife cooked, cleaned, and lived her life directly above them. The truth only came out when one of the children became so sick that Fritzla had to bring her upstairs for medical help. Doctors became suspicious. Police followed the trail down into the basement. What they found was not just a hidden room, it was an entire life buried under an ordinary home. Children who had never seen the sky were living under the floorboards of a house where people drank coffee, watched television, and believed everything was normal. And that is the part that stays with you. Not that he built the room, but that for 24 years, normal life was happening directly above the nightmare. close enough to hear footsteps through the ceiling, and still no one knew. 12. You know the story. A family moves into a new house and finds signs someone may have been hiding there. A hidden mattress, empty wrappers, a worn patch on the floor. They tell themselves it means nothing. Most families do. The Gruber family of Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria did exactly that. In March 1922, Andreas Gruber found footprints in the snow leading from the forest directly to the farm, with none leading back out. A newspaper appeared on the table that nobody had purchased. Keys went missing. The previous maid had already quit, telling people the house felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. Andreas mentioned the footprints to a neighbor, then went home and did nothing about it. Someone had been living in that farmhouse loft for weeks, watching the family from above. In March 1922, each family member was lured to the barn separately and beaten to death with a mattock. All 6 of them, including a 6-year-old child. Then the killer walked back inside, cooked their food, fed their animals, and stayed for 3 more days before disappearing completely. The case was never solved. No arrest was ever made. Nobody ever found his footprints leaving. 13. On the morning of July 10th, 1951, a landlady in St. Petersburg, Florida, went to deliver a telegram to her tenant, Mary Reeser. When she touched the door handle, it was hot. She pushed it open and called for help immediately. When investigators entered the apartment, they found a circle of ash on the floor, where an armchair had been. In the ashes were a single human foot, still wearing a slipper, a shrunken skull, and almost nothing else. Mary Reeser, a 67-year-old woman, had been reduced almost entirely to ash while seated in her chair. What made the case so disturbing was how contained it was. The chair was destroyed, the floor beneath it was scorched, but the rest of the apartment was barely touched. Nearby newspapers had not burned. Candles had softened, but not melted. The FBI investigated and described it as one of the strangest cases they had ever seen. Skeptics pointed to the wick effect, the theory that human body fat, once ignited, can sustain a slow, contained burn over time. It is a reasonable theory. Maybe that explains part of it, but it does not explain why the room still looked almost untouched, as if the fire had known exactly where to stop. And the official report never explained that either. 14. Most people assume the Island of Dolls was built for tourists, something made to look creepy. A place designed for photographs, stories, and fear. It was not. Julian Santana Barrera built it alone, over 50 years for himself. In the 1950s, Julian found the body of a young girl, floating in the canal beside his small island in Xochimilco. He could not save her. Soon after, he found a doll drifting in the same water and hung it from a tree, not as decoration, but as an offering, an apology to a child he could not help. Then he kept going. For the next 5 decades, he covered the island with dolls, hundreds of them. Broken dolls, dolls missing limbs, dolls with hollow eyes and rotting hair. He hung them from trees, nailed them to walls, and placed them in windows until the whole island felt alive with faces. Visitors said it felt like being watched from every direction at once. Julian lived there alone the entire time, quietly tending an offering to a girl whose name he never even knew. Then in 2001, his nephew found Julian floating face down in the canal, in the exact same place where Julian said he had found the girl. The island is still there, and after all those years, the island still feels like a wound that never healed. 15. You've heard the story before. A person wakes up in a bathtub full of ice, drugged, cut open, and missing a kidney. It sounds like the kind of urban legend people repeat because it is disturbing, not because it is true. For years, most people treated it that way. Then in 2009, several men came forward and described something far worse. They had been promised simple manual labor jobs, good pay, and easy work. Instead, they were drugged during transport. When they woke up, they were in unfamiliar rooms with fresh stitches across their bodies and organs already removed. This was not some random nightmare. The victims had been chosen carefully, poor day laborers. Men with no money, no protection, and no way to make anyone listen. The kind of people the world ignores even when they are telling the truth. That is what makes this story so dark. The legend survived for years because people imagined the wrong victim. They pictured rich businessmen in hotel rooms and treated the whole thing like fiction. But the real victims were the people nobody was looking for. So how many real horrors get dismissed as myths just because they happen to people the world has already decided not to see? 16. For 3 weeks, guests at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles complained about the water. The pressure was low, the taste was strange. Sometimes it came out dark if the tap ran too long. Staff noted the complaints, blamed old pipes, and handed out bottled water to some guests. Then, in February 2013, a maintenance worker climbed to the rooftop tanks to check the problem. Inside, he found Elisa Lam's body. She had been in the hotel's water supply for 21 days. Guests had been drinking that water, brushing their teeth with it, and showering in it every morning without knowing. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student traveling alone. When police investigated, they found no clear signs of assault and no answer that fully explained how she ended up inside the tank. But what made the case impossible to forget was the elevator footage. Released during the investigation, it showed Elisa pressing multiple buttons, stepping in and out, and seeming to react to something no one else could see. The video spread everywhere. Millions watched it, and almost everyone walked away with the same feeling. Not that they had seen a mystery solved, but that they had watched the moment before something went terribly wrong and still had no idea what was waiting for her when the doors opened. 17. Every town has a story like this. An escaped patient, a figure in the woods, someone parents warn their children about so they stay away from dark places. Most people assume those stories are just folklore. On Staten Island, that story had a name: Cropsey. The legend existed long before anyone connected it to a real person. It was tied to Willowbrook State School, a place so horrific that secret footage filmed inside in 1972 caused a national scandal. Children with disabilities were kept in filthy, overcrowded conditions and subjected to abuse and neglect. Andre Rand had worked there as an orderly. After Willowbrook closed, Rand remained on the abandoned grounds, wandering the ruins long after everyone else was gone. Then children from nearby neighborhoods began disappearing. In 1987, 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger vanished. 35 days later, her body was found in a shallow grave near Rand's campsite on the old Willowbrook property. Witnesses had seen him with her. He was convicted of kidnapping, but never murder. That is what makes the story worse. The monster was already part of the town's folklore. He just gave it a face. 18. You're babysitting alone. The house is quiet now. The kids are finally asleep. For the first time all night, everything feels still. Then your phone buzzes. Unknown number. A single message appears on the screen. I'm watching you. You call the police. They tell you to lock the doors, stay calm, wait for help. You try to breathe. Then your phone buzzes again. I'm closer than you think. Now you're scanning every window, every door, every shadow in the house. You never think to look down. Sounds like a horror movie, right? Except this actually happened. In Chester, England, in 2013, a teenage girl had been stalked for months by a man named Kyle Ravenscroft. One night, her phone lit up with messages saying he was watching her, that he was close, that he could see her. She assumed he was outside. He wasn't outside. He was under her bed, texting her from the darkness beneath the mattress while she sat just inches above him, completely unaware. And he stayed there all night. That is what makes this story so disturbing. Not because someone was watching her from far away, but because the danger was already inside the room, hidden in the one place no one checks until it is too late. Ravenscroft was sentenced to 12 weeks in prison and fined 100 doplins for spending the night under a teenage girl's bed. And that was his first offense. 19. Hospitals are built on one basic belief. The danger is inside the patient. The doctors are safe. The room is safe. Everything outside the body is supposed to be controlled. On February 19, 1994, that belief collapsed in an emergency room in Riverside, California. Gloria Ramirez was 31 years old and dying from advanced cervical cancer when her family brought her into Riverside General Hospital. The staff moved fast. Monitors, blood draw, medication. It was standard procedure, the kind they had done countless times before. Then a nurse noticed something strange in the blood sample. There was an oily layer floating on top and a sharp, sweet smell that did not belong in a hospital room. She pointed it out, then she collapsed. Within minutes, more staff members started getting sick. By the end of the night, 23 hospital workers had fallen ill. 5 were hospitalized. One needed a ventilator. The emergency room was evacuated and sealed by a hazmat team. Gloria Ramirez was left inside. She died that night. Scientists later believed that a pain relief chemical in her body may have reacted during organ failure and created a toxic gas in her blood. In other words, her body had become something the hospital had no way to prepare for. The legend says her blood did something impossible. The truth did not need the exaggeration. The people trying to save her were the next ones carried out of the room. 20. In the 1990s, PCP had a reputation that many people dismissed as exaggeration. PCP, short for phencyclidinine, is a powerful dissociative drug that can distort pain, reality, and behavior so severely that users may become detached, violent, and impossible to reason with. The stories about what it could truly make a person do were often dismissed as moral panic, urban legend, the kind of thing parents said to frighten teenagers. Then came April 2002. Antron Singleton, a 25-year-old rapper known as Big Lurch, had taken a large amount of PCP in his Los Angeles apartment. His roommate, 21-year-old Tanisha Asais, was alone there with him. Police found her the following morning. She had been stabbed repeatedly. There were bite marks across her face and chest. Singleton was found outside, standing in the street, naked, covered in blood, and staring up at the sky without blinking. A medical examination confirmed he had consumed human flesh. He stood trial and argued that PCP-induced psychosis had removed his conscious control. The jury disagreed. He received a life sentence and remains in prison today. The people who called those stories exaggerated were not proven wrong by rumor. They were proven wrong by what happened to Tanisha Asais. 21. In October 2016, people across America started seeing clowns, not at circuses, not at parties, just standing silently on roadsides at 2 a.m., watching from the edges of school grounds, or motionless in tree lines, far enough away to make sure they were seen. Some held balloons. Some held things that looked worse. Within weeks, it spread to 46 states and then to 18 countries. Schools went into lockdown, parents kept children inside, people were arrested. The FBI even opened an investigation to find out who was behind it. But they found no organizer, no motive, and no real explanation. The strongest theory was social contagion. One person did it, others saw the fear and copied it, and suddenly thousands of people across 2 continents were dressing as clowns and standing in the dark for no reason anyone could fully explain. And somehow, that made it worse. A conspiracy would at least make sense. But this had no center, no purpose, and no clear end. It just started, spread everywhere, and then stopped. And nobody has ever fully explained why. Maybe the scariest part was not that someone planned it. It was that nobody had to. 22. On the morning of February 9, 1855, people across Devon, England woke up to fresh snow and found tracks that made no sense. They looked like hoof prints, but not from any normal animal. Each print was cloven, evenly spaced, and set in a single straight line, as if whatever made them had been walking on 2 legs, and the trail kept going. For more than 100 miles, the prints crossed rivers, appeared on rooftops, passed over walls, and showed up inside enclosed courtyards where no animal should have been able to enter. Wherever people expected the trail to stop, it continued on the other side. Panic spread quickly. Churches filled. People were afraid to go outside after dark. Naturalists studied the tracks and could not match them to any known animal. No one could explain what kind of creature could leave prints like that, travel that far in one night, and never break its path. Whatever crossed Devon that night did not wander. It moved with purpose, and no one has ever found out where it was going. 23. In California's Santa Lucia Mountains, hikers often describe the same unsettling feeling. Something is watching them from above. Most assume it's just the mountains. The Chumash have another explanation. For generations, they have described tall, dark, human-shaped figures standing motionless along the ridgelines, watching travelers move through the valleys below. They do not come closer, they do not speak, and if anyone tries to reach them, they are gone before the distance can close. What makes the story harder to dismiss is how long it has stayed the same. In 1937, poet Robinson Jeffers wrote about them directly. A year later, John Steinbeck mentioned them in Flight as something California readers would already know. And across centuries, the details never change. Tall figures, wide-brimmed hats, staffs, complete stillness, always high above, always watching, never once coming closer. No photograph has ever captured one, and maybe that is what makes it so hard to dismiss. Indigenous elders don't describe them as supernatural. They describe them as something that has simply always been there, watching the mountains the way the mountains watch everything else. What they cannot explain is why every silhouette across 4 centuries looks exactly the same. 24. Sean Robinson's grandmother kept the painting hidden for 25 years. She refused to display it. Before she died, she warned him, "Do not hang it up." She told him what she knew about it. The artist, she said, had mixed his own blood into the paint while creating it. Shortly after finishing the work, he killed himself. Robinson inherited it in 2010. He hung it in his home. Within days, his family noticed things. Sounds at night with no identifiable source. Shadows moving at the edges of rooms. Objects displaced from where they had been left. Then his son was pushed down the stairs by something none of them could see. Robinson set up cameras and began documenting everything. The footage, objects moving, a figure appearing briefly at the edge of frame, shadows crossing rooms with no source, was uploaded to YouTube and watched millions of times. Paranormal investigators brought electromagnetic equipment into the house and recorded unusual readings concentrated specifically around the painting. Robinson eventually removed it from the wall. It is currently locked in his basement. He has declined every offer to sell it. And maybe that says more than the videos ever did. Because if he truly believed it was nothing, he would have thrown it away. 25. On the night Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election, he went home, lay down on a sofa, and looked into the mirror across the room. He saw 2 faces. One was his own, the other was the same face but paler, almost fading, like a version of himself already slipping away. He looked again. It was still there. Only when he stood up did it disappear. That night, he told Mary Lincoln what he had seen. She began to cry. In the days that followed, Lincoln tried to recreate it. Same room, same position, same light. And the second face came back. He never claimed to understand it completely, but he believed it meant one thing. He would win a second term, and he would not live through it. Imagine carrying that thought in your mind for 4 years, waking up with it, working with it, living inside history, while quietly believing you had already seen how it would end. Lincoln was re-elected in November 1864. On April 14, 1865, just 6 weeks into his second term, he was shot at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning. After his death, his secretary John Hay wrote the story down, preserving it as a record, not just a rumor. And maybe that is the part that stays with people. Not that Lincoln saw something strange in the mirror, but that he may have glimpsed the end of his own life, understood what it meant, and still had to keep walking toward it anyway. 26. During a cholera outbreak, people were buried fast, sometimes within hours of being declared dead, long before anyone could be truly certain. Families were told it was necessary, and most had no choice but to believe it. In France in 1867, Philomèle Jaunet was 24 years old when she was declared dead from cholera. A priest gave her last rites. Her family said goodbye. 16 hours later, she was buried. The grave diggers were about to leave when they heard knocking from beneath the earth. They dug her out. A doctor examined her and found the signs no one should have found in a grave. A faint rhythm in her chest, muscle movement, eyelids reacting. He worked through the night to save her. The injuries on her hands showed she had been awake underground, clawing and beating against the coffin lid in total darkness. She died the next morning. After cases like this, waiting mortuaries began appearing across Europe. Bodies were held for days, with bells attached to their fingers in case anyone moved. The bells were not invented because people were afraid. They were invented because people had already been buried alive. 27. Ruthie McCoy lived alone in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects in 1987. She was 52 and diagnosed with schizophrenia. So when she started screaming that men were coming through her bathroom mirror, neighbors assumed it was the illness talking. They had heard things like that before. Some waited, some turned up their televisions. No one called the police for 30 minutes. What they did not know, or did not fully believe in that moment, was that the apartments had a flaw built into them. The medicine cabinets were set into thin shared walls. Remove the cabinet from the vacant unit next door, and the opening was large enough for someone to crawl through. That was exactly how the robbers got in. They had heard things like this before. They came through the wall just as Ruthie had been screaming. When the robbery turned violent, they shot her 4 times and left through the same opening. She bled to death on her bathroom floor. After her murder, the flaw was officially documented and the cabinets were eventually changed. No one was ever charged. The worst part is not that Ruthie was screaming something impossible. It is that she was telling the truth, and everyone around her had already learned not to believe her. 28. In 2001, a German computer technician named Armin Mewis posted an advertisement on an internet forum requesting someone willing to be slaughtered and consumed. He was specific. He left his contact details. Over 400 people responded. One man, Bernd Brandes, a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin, traveled willingly to Mewis's farmhouse. He had read the advertisement carefully. He knew exactly what he was agreeing to. Mewis filmed everything. When police arrested Mewis, German courts faced a problem nobody had written legislation for. Bernd Brandes had consented, fully, clearly, in writing, in person. He had arrived of his own will and refused multiple opportunities to leave. German law had no framework for prosecuting a murder the victim had agreed to. The first trial convicted Mewis of manslaughter, not murder. A second trial in 2006 changed that to murder and gave him a life sentence. But to get there, Germany had to rethink parts of its own criminal law. He was only caught because another person who answered the ad got scared and contacted police. There had been more than 400 replies. And the thought that stays with you is simple: how many of the others did not get scared in time? 29. In 1996, Brian Bethel was sitting in his car in Abilene, Texas when 2 children approached his window at night. He documented the encounter the same day it happened, in a written account time-stamped before the story existed anywhere online. The children were pale. They spoke calmly and politely. They asked to be let inside the car. Their eyes were entirely black. No whites, no pupils, just solid uniform black from edge to edge. Bethel did not open the door. He later described a sudden, overwhelming dread, a deep instinct telling him to leave immediately. So he drove away. Years later, when he shared the story, hundreds of people from different countries reported nearly identical encounters: pale children, black eyes, calm voices, and the same request to be let in. One detail appeared again and again: a strong feeling that opening the door would be a terrible mistake. No witness has ever said they let them inside. No photograph has ever confirmed what they were, and maybe that is the only reason nobody knows what happens if you do. 30. Every teenager has heard some version of the story. A couple parked alone at night, a dark road, and something emerging from the darkness. In Texarkana in 1946, that story became real. Over 10 weeks between February and May, an unidentified man attacked 8 people on deserted roads on the outskirts of the city. Every attack followed the same pattern: couples, parked alone, in cars, on dark isolated roads far from anyone who might hear. 8 people were attacked. 5 survived, 3 didn't. Police, Texas Rangers, and the FBI all investigated. No weapon was found. No weapon was ever recovered. No physical evidence leading anywhere useful. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the attacks stopped. The killer did not make a mistake. He did not confess. He did not return. He simply disappeared back into ordinary life. The case remains one of the oldest unsolved serial murder investigations in American history. Texarkana never forgot those 10 weeks. People checked locks, avoided dark roads, and watched parked cars differently after that. The couples thought they were somewhere quiet for the night. They did not know they were entering a legend. 31. Rural roads in western Pennsylvania are almost completely dark at night. No streetlights, no traffic, just your headlights cutting through the black. That was where drivers started seeing him, a man walking slowly along Route 351 with a cane, appearing suddenly out of the darkness. And when the headlights hit his face, drivers panicked. Or rather, where his face should have been. No eyes, no nose. Skin so badly scarred that, in the glare of the lights, it seemed to glow green for a second. Most people sped up and never looked back. For years, Beaver County turned him into a legend, the Green Man, a roadside monster people dared each other to find. But his name was Raymond Robinson. In 1918, when he was just 8 years old, he touched a power line carrying 22,000 volts while climbing a bridge near Beaver Falls. It took his eyes, his nose, and his arm, but it did not kill him. He grew up doing craft work at home and walked at night for one simple reason. He did not want to scare people in daylight, and that may be the saddest part of the whole story. The monster on the road was real, but he was only terrifying because people looked at him before they understood him. Before you go, one question. Which of these did you actually believe was fiction before today? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. If this video changed the way you see any of these stories, hit like. It takes 1 second and it means everything. And if you want more stories that were never supposed to be real, subscribe. We do this every week. We'll see you on the next one.